Yeah. So this chair is for you. And whenever you're ready, that's the on button.
So as a seasoned hobby musician, I would say, check 1, 2, check 1, 2.
Yeah. So for those virtual, it may be difficult to hear. I'm trying to project to prevent that and have the mics in the room pick up. This is Mr. Mark Patrick. He's a senior records officer, works within the office of the DoD CIO. And I'm going to let him talk about himself a little bit here. But in particular, I want to take a pause and thank you for your service. Is it 30 years, almost 30 years, right at 30 years, something like that? I was creeping your LinkedIn profile. And I was trying to like map the dates, but in particular as a helicopter pilot, and I find myself always falling in step with helicopter pilots. My coworker Carly was a helicopter pilot in the Army, and so here's another one. Thank you very much.
Thank you. So first, let me get a sound check out in virtual land. Can you hear me? Somebody let me know. But you can hear this microphone. We good?
Loud and clear. Loud and clear.
Awesome, awesome. Thank you. So in a tribute to General Milley, from where I came from on the Joint Staff, I brought a paper binder. He loved this. I love the pictures of him at meetings with other military leaders, and they would have nothing in front of me, a stack of binders, which we had to deal with later. But anyway, so yes, I'm Mark Patrick. I am the records officer for the Department of Defense. Only recently coming there from the Joint Staff after almost 16 years as the Information Management Division Chief, which had records management as a part of the portfolio there. Also had FOIA, some knowledge management, and some other things. So before that, many years ago in the glory days, I flew H-60s. The variant that I fly is no longer gracing the skies. It's like in the boneyard somewhere. But so I'm very glad to be here, and thank you for Dan for reaching out to come here. I also it's good to see you in person, Lisa. Thank you, John, for coming. We talked last week. Matt and the team for coming from the Joint Staff. I really appreciate that. And so what I want to, okay, here we go. What I want to talk about is on this agenda slide here. And when I was first asked to speak, our new records management strategy hadn't been publicly released. So I kind of wrote this vague slide deck, hoping I would be able to talk about it, but it's since been released. And so I've incorporated some things in there. But a couple of thoughts are that the pictures in here, all of them except for one, have been taken since I became the records officer back on the 13th of April. So these are all very current pictures. Secondly, the graphics all come from the strategy. So you can Google DoD CIO library, and you'll see this new record strategy is there, easy to find, and the graphics are all from there. But I really want to focus, the reason I picked these pictures is because just like it says on the front of the strategy, deploying the full spectrum of DoD information for decision advantage, this is really about mission performance for me, records management. It's an enabler of mission performance. And who it's really all about is this young lady in this picture right here. And the thousands and millions of service folks and civilians and contractors who help DoD do its mission. So I'm going to talk about the information universe in DoD, my role a little bit as I go through. I'm going to camp out a bit on the record strategy since that's the new thing. The new manual, the 5015, isn't dead. It just has a flesh wound. So it will be superseded by the 8180, which is in legal sufficiency review right now, but it's done. I have a draft copy that I'll let you look at, but you can't have a copy of it if you would like. So you can see that. I'll talk about that some briefly, where we're headed with 365, and then some final thoughts. So that decision advantage is really getting to the best, fastest decision of a senior leader. So that theme will come up as I go through here. I try to line the actual slide. So the DoD information universe is huge. 3 million people-ish, civilian, military contractors. We do our information on generally 3 security domains: unclassified, secret, and top secret. There's some complexity there. And the diversity of the missions that we do And the cultures that make up the broader DoD culture are broad too. There is generally always a sense of urgency all the time about everything that we do. And I would caution you on being happy about acronyms. I would run the other direction on that. And the IT budget. So the DoD records officer is in the DoD CIO under the Deputy CIO for Resources and Analysis in an office called CIO Statutory Implementation. Really like that title, but that's where I am located. But the thing about that is I have come to appreciate that being where money decisions happen is very important, because no Bucks, no Buck Rogers, no records managed, no E5 licenses if you're Microsoft. So I like the place that I'm coming to really like that. So in my role as a records officer, strategy and policy, the DoD 5015.02, people always leave out the zero, and my military type A is like, it's 02. And this standard, which I'll talk about more, I am really focused on enabling and giving voice to the larger records management community in DoD and trying to use teams to, to bring life to that community, make myself accessible, make the various records officers accessible to one another, and so have immediately taken to that tool set to do that. The DoD, there is the senior agency official for records management. For the department, that is the Deputy CIO for Resources and Analysis, Chris Condon. She's awesome. But we're so big, we have 11 senior agency officials for records management. So where I was in the joint staff, there was the director of management who was an SES, who was the senior agency official for the joint community. So all the 11 combatant commands and the joint staff, she was that role. So technically, functionally, I report to the senior agency official for records management. My role hadn't been full-time in a while, and world events and things that got on the news starting last summer created an opportunity to create a full-time billet, which I now have the pleasure to occupy. And so this is another thing with records management. Look for those opportunities. Wherever there's something happening in the news, like there is very much recently, there are opportunities to make headway in records management. So we have aligned our strategy under the data strategy, which I'll get into more, and that's important. So the picture in this one, I just want to point out, if you think about something that to me is so cool, is this aircraft flying. But this aircraft involves an incredible amount of records. Learning to fly it, learning to maintain it, deploying it, tactics, and the people that help this guy, Raz, hundreds of people give Raz this opportunity to go to full afterburn this aircraft. And the records associated with that, just on this one platform, blow my mind. So hat tip to my former service here. Think about this platform, an aircraft carrier, and the number of records associated with just the ship itself, much less the systems on the ship, the personnel on the ship, the multiple squadrons and things that deploy on the ship. So this is just the idea of the immensity of the records management challenge. Now, alliances. So now you might be talking about shared systems where you have records in a system that belong to two countries at the same time. So you have their copy and your copy. There's complexity there, but again, I want to double down on the fact that the pictures I'm showing you are like weeks old. I mean, you can go on the DoD website. They're all taken by service members, by the way. So another sort of records management behind the scenes, but always remembering. And what I want to encourage you, whatever government agency you're with, is that you are supporting your mission. You are supporting your mission. And we're completely aligned on the concept, which we'll talk about later, that we want to push records management to the background. Critically important, but it supports the mission if it's done well. And that gets into marketing, which I'll talk a little bit more later. So this is actually the oldest photo from January. And what this gets to is the constant evolution of records. So now we have an entire new service, the Space Force, and the Guardians. And so they're new. They're making new records. They don't even have anything ready to accession at NARA yet. But this just is another chapter in the story of the evolution of DoD records and how complex it is. Finally, my old boss here, circling right back to decision advantage. Okay, so he is the senior most military officer in the U.S. Armed Forces by law. And his whole reason for being is to give best military advice to the Secretary of Defense and the President and National Command authorities. Those advice products are generated by folks doing his homework that we call action officers. And they are on the daily going into the institutional memory of the staff so that they can give rapid, rigorously analyzed courses of action for him to consider, because he has to make so many decisions. And, you know, it's exciting that some of the folks here that manage the correspondence system for the Joint Staff are here, and they see these, you know, 10,000 packages a year going before this individual as he works to do his job. So records management oversight in the environment is challenging. So that's kind of intro thoughts as I get into the record strategy. So again, this was released publicly on the 10th of May. It's about 27 pages long. And I want to say, I was walking through the door. This thing's been in work for almost 3 years. And Tricia Spencer and a few other folks on a small but mighty team at the DoD CIO have been iterating and interacting with multiple groups to get this right. And I'm just lucky and happy to be here as this strategy is released. I also see it as my marching orders, and it's a pretty tall set of marching orders. So we'll talk about it a little bit. But as I get into the graphics here, I'm not going to get into too deep of detail because we don't have the time. But the curation, automation, governance theme. So this is one of the major themes of the strategy. And it is linked to the data strategies, Baltus goals. I'm not even going to say what those are. It's like math in public. But anyway, so we're just gearing up to implement the strategy. In the strategy is a 5-year plan. I've already told you how you can find it. What's key is that the Deputy Secretary of Defense signed the strategy, and it joins the family of strategies on that CIO library page. And she says in her opening letter that this is must do. Find the resources to do this. That's incredibly important and leverage for us as we interact with our community to help them get the tools that they need to do this. So it entails several key enablers and approaches, and I'll fly through these graphics and just hit those, and it's kind of a teaser, all right? So this first graphic essentially gets to the concept of a mismatch between records and IT lifespans of systems. This is problematic, right? So this is a point that the strategy focuses on, and it must be planned for, right? So right there, you can see this is driving us to get together with our IT folks. This is a slide that I love, especially coming from where I just came from, and it gets that big idea of decision advantage. But here you have represented this relationship between the folks who serve as a decision maker and the filters between that staff that are going to archives, big data, and the AI chief data office folks for their inputs, going into the senior correspondence library to look at historical trends of policies and interactions on various issues, open source intelligence, classified intelligence, various databases, and common operating picture. So you have all this information that's being sort of synthesized and filtered through folks that are doing the senior leader's homework so that those best, fastest decisions can be made. So there are processes which are incredibly important to understand the record outputs of processes throughout this. And this gets to something that the Deputy Secretary of Defense said actually at a data forum. And she said that she wanted the focus to shift from a compliance mindset to an output mindset, which gets to this, again, this theme of we are talking about the performance of our organization more than compliance. Compliance is a necessary enabler. So, but the mindset makes a difference. Records are everywhere. They're not ancillary, they're not administrative. They're basically the heart and soul of the decision apparatus of our organizations. I was excited when I made a post about the strategy on LinkedIn that the Honorable John Sherman actually commented it from his personal LinkedIn account. And he essentially backed this thought up about the relationship between decision-making and records. That was cool. I wrote an internal blog post about that. But, so the fact that the Deputy Secretary of Defense signed it and the DoD CIO believes it is important. So next graphic really gets to, in my mind, the changing value of records. And you talked about it, Lisa, that, you know, the day you create it, that's not necessarily where the value is known. It takes time. It speaks to the relationship between the records professionals and the subject matter experts who understand the value of that information over time, and there needing to be this relationship there. Again, compliance is an enabler. Disposition schedules need to be living, breathing things. It's embodying this relationship because what you can do with AI can make something in aggregate with scads and scads of information have value that didn't exist before. So this is an important concept to consider there. So this slide or this graphic really for records professionals is sort of very basic. This gets to the idea of this strategy is meant as a marketing tool, not just internally, but to talk to audiences that don't even understand what a disposition schedule even is. And so you have this kind of basic thing. But my point that I want to talk about here is that there is a marketing burden on information professionals within their organizations, depending on who they're talking to ensure that they can paint a picture of this relationship between records management and operational performance. It's helpful that a couple senior folks believe that, but we have to understand it and believe it and be able to explain it. And it starts with, okay, let me talk to you about a disposition schedule. And then to talk through the various records in the universe to essentially get support for the resources that you need to do all of the fancy stuff we need to do. So next graphic really gets to the heart of what we need to do to go from a complex and hard to automate environment to an automatable environment. Simplify, standardize. So this is challenging in our big environment where we have 14 DoD 365 tenants in the department. Our office is in what is called the J tenant, which I'm guessing stands for joint, because J usually stands for joint tenant. And there are 81 organizations in that one of 14 tenants across the DoD. They are administered separately under separate IT budgets. And when you look at this strategy and its expectation of simplification, standardization, you can start to see that this is going to be not a simple lift. So we get back to the curation, automation, and governance and talking about metadata here. So I was interested to see yesterday on the Records Express blog, digitizing records and metadata. It came out, hit my mailbox today. But metadata, you know, it doesn't take much. You realize it's the king, queen, jack, ace, it's everything, right? So the strategy embraces that, and we are going to have to dig deep into metadata as our path forward. So this graphic gets at the evolution of the DoD 5015 standard, 5015-02 standard, where it's going. So the new manual, it is a manual, 8180.AA. It's in legal sufficiency review. It's coming. And then we look at our 5-year plan, and we have some other products that we anticipate that we're going to be rolling out as we work our way through the strategy. More to follow on that, you know, once it's publicly released. So this is analogous to the graphic that Dan put up earlier with a little different colored people in the business units and all that. This is what we believe is the evolving records management team, all right? It is really here presented as a beautiful flower. It involves all the petals of this flower coming together to make this work. And if you're missing one of these petals, you're not going to succeed in executing the strategy. So the more complex records management has become, means that the records management team has to have these relationships to make this all work with the IT folks, the data folks, getting in at ground zero at IT system acquisition so that records management is making and plan for and pay for at the beginning. And then functional experts having the relationships such that you understand how the various information creators in your organization support the mission so that you can have this conversation around changing value of the information. So this would make a great lapel pin. Great lapel pin. So this gets again to what Lisa was saying about how we envision records management responsibilities evolving over time, so that in the top current picture, where you currently have users being expected to do too much of this stuff, we want to move to the future where you have special expertise that is not a collateral duty, by the way, that is full-time, and that your core competency folks can focus on their core competency and not have to take a bunch of records training and do a bunch of things that aren't related to that core competency. So systematically, there is policy oversight and advocacy. All the pieces are gathered together there in the strategy. Advocacy is really about resources. It's about educating. It's about doing the things that you need to do to bring that evolved records management team to life. So this is kind of a quick map of the 5-year strategy. Notable on here is that in the out years, some of the offices of primary responsibility are to be determined. And this is notional. So some of the things on here, we're actually sitting in here talking to Tricia and we're like, oh yeah, we need to probably move this one sooner. So, but this is our notional plan across 5 years. It's ambitious, but it gives us some guardrails and some focus and prepares us to be ready when the next opportunity happens, whether that might be a news story or an IG report or what have you. Because when you get the senior leaders' attention, that's when they're willing to sign checks. And, that's what it takes. So, so that's a skip through the strategy just by looking at the graphics in the strategy. I encourage you to take a look at it if you want to dig deeper on any of those graphics. And you can find us by searching NARA Records Officers Defense. And all of the defense records officers will coming up. And I'll be in the upper left-hand corner. And there's a group email address. So if you use that, it'll go to the whole team in case I'm off on leave or something, and somebody will get that. And I encourage you to use that if you have questions to follow up. So the new manual is in legal sufficiency review, as I said. It will replace the 5015 standard. The big story here is that though it's hard for me to say it's dead, we recognize as a team that it wasn't working because having a platform that is capable of managing records is not the same thing as managing records properly in the platform. So the big shift is on to the deployment of the system and not a checklist for this software. Now you can buy it and your IT people say, hey, we've given you a 5015 compliant platform, good to go, because that is not where the hard work is. So, and it's no different with the Microsoft platform. There is hard work here, and I have worries as I think about this. So it's a big deal. There'll be more about it once it's publicly released, and it is an evolution. It's not like starting from ground zero because the values that were in that 5015 standard remain. I'm sure Janet Gallatin, anybody who worked 5015, know her. She was a tester at JITIC. She retired from there, and now she's happily contract support to my office, and still very much passionate about this, as I am. So where are we headed with 365? I've already mentioned the huge number of tenants we have and 81 organizations in our tenant. So we are working with DISA and their contract support team to make the configurations, at least in the tenant that we manage, and we'll get across all the security domains. So the vision currently is that there will be a single domain in the secret domain. I am hesitant to believe that to be true until I see it, and then we'll see about the top secret domain. So DoD CIO also has a 365 Tiger team where we interact with all the folks who are involved technically that are out there in the field, and that is an active thing. So it's a work in progress, I would say, on 365, and I'll leave it at that for now. Last photo here, there are still physical records, but just as this photo taken on April 11th shows you, they're becoming digital as the guy walks through the aisle, scans them. So they're managed digitally anyway. Final points are, this is an operational enabling thing, records management. It's critical to the performance of our organizations. And it is critical that we evolve our teams that are involved in records management to collaborate with the other petals in the flower, if you will. One of the thoughts, as you talked about, like sort of the different disciplines, because I have this like operational focus, I want to enable that collaboration, knowledge management, and records management. So I'm not just looking at the labels and disposition. I'm wanting them specifically to be able to leverage those two. I had an exciting conversation with the chief data officer at U.S. Southern Command, who in that organization, the records manager reports to him and the chief knowledge officer reports to him. And he had this demo he wanted to give. He was very excited about it. And it was really about how he could use metadata to service the action officers, but secretly in the background, he could do records management too. And I was like, oh, revolutionary, you know? So we had a great conversation. So, but he came at it from a completely different perspective and derived that metadata is king, queen, base, jack, etc. So the challenge with working in those different groups is they have different vocabulary. Microsoft has different vocabulary. Data people have different vocabulary, knowledge, and it creates, or it can create what I call a digital Tower of Babel. And we have to break that tower down and get around that flower together and solve this. So those are the big ideas that I wanted to share about the program, the strategy, what's coming with the manual, and I'm happy to take questions if there's time. If there's not.
Does anyone in the room have questions first and foremost? Because there's a few in the chat, but if anyone in here has questions?
And I appreciate Eddie Guzman for sounding off that 5015 isn't dead. US sitcom.
So one thing in the chat comes from David C, and it's kind of a question, kind of a statement. Looking at the big picture, if DoD is the lead for records created by each service branch, has DoD considered submitting an overarching record schedule that covers common service records to all branches that could or would supersede multiple independent service branch schedules?
Yes, more than once. And we're considering it again. And as you consider simplification and standardization, you're right on that. So I don't know, Tricia, do you have any comments? But that's it. So
Big challenge.
yeah,
Yeah.
hard.
and so
When it was
we're-
tried before, it didn't work, you know, so we have to try again from another perspective, and the technology opportunities that are available make it imperative. So
Yeah.
yes, on our minds.
So apologies, this second one is a comment from Tim, not a question. So I will say, I just want to kind of piggyback onto that with regard to one of the features that is coming to GA in our DoD cloud in particular this month is trainable classifiers. So the ability to take, it's not quite document fingerprinting, but the ability to take like a DD 2875 or a 214 or something that is common, same document used across the enterprise. Policy can be written then to automate that so that every time the system encounters a 214 with a certificate-based digital signature, for example, it's auto-classifying, auto-applying that retention schedule. So more to come on that. It sounds like that's some exciting stuff happening on that front, but I'd love to work further on that to specifically leverage the trainable classifiers that are coming GA this month. So any other questions in the room? That was excellent. Thank you very much. We have lunch. Let me stop the recording and I'll take your mic from you. For in-person attendees, we have lunch. It's on the 13th floor. You'll find it in the same place that you found breakfast, and it has, thank you. And it has very kindly been provided by Epic and Dan, who was our first speaker. So We'll reconvene at 12:30. You have a little extra time for lunch. And for our virtual attendees, I am going to stop sharing and stop the recording, and we'll reconvene at 12:30. You can drop off if you choose. We'll remain on the line at your choice. And when we come back, we'll have a demonstration from Amila, who is a Microsoft consultant supporting Navy flank speed and their records management hub implementation. Thanks, everyone.